when I got asked to be a keynote speaker, I kind of looked at the list of who was speaking, and I said, I think I'm the only one who's not going to be wearing a suit or who wrote my own book. Could be because I'm 33, could be because I'm still on my path, maybe it's because I've had some experiences but not enough to write them down. But what's really exciting about everything we do, whether it's myself, whether it's yourself, we all have our own stories. And over the next few minutes, I hope to share with you my story, my journey, in a way that I've always tried to figure out and keep waiting for what was it that I kind of want to do. Just by a kind of clapping, if you're between 15 and 45, can you just clap so I can kind of get an idea? So I'm not sure how familiar or not some of you are, but that group of people that just clapped, for the first time ever in humankind or human history, this generation between kind of 15 to 45 will be poorer than the generation before us. It is the first time that we've ever actually gone downhill as an economy, as a culture, as a world. And so it's that market, Generation X, Generation Y, that I'm real focused about and what's kind of continued to let me go through my journey. So I'm going to tell you a story first. It's not my story. It's a story I love to tell. It's, I don't know if there's any Canadians in the room. Clap. All right. Hi, people. So we have a fantastic retailer in Canada. It's a high-end men's clothing store called Harry Rosen. It does about $300 million in business. Average suits are, $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 suits. I clearly shop there all the time. And I know Harry, the original founder himself, and he tells a great story about his uncle. His uncle used to work in a place in the 1930s, 1940s in Kensington Market. It's a place just kind of in Toronto. And I'm sure you have similar places kind of near and around the Boston area or other parts of the United States where when you go to one of these areas, Chinatown might be a similar example, you see like a hawker, a stall, and they're carrying something, and you're like, wow, they got the best fruit, the best tomatoes, and then you look, there's like 50 stalls with the exact same tomatoes. So in Kensington Market, herring at the time was the thing, type of fish. And see, Harry's uncle always sold out of his fish every day. Didn't matter how many he had. He had 100, he had 200, he had 5, always sold out. And all the other guys in the other kind of stalls all the way down the street, they just couldn't figure it out. What was it about Harry's uncle that always allowed him to sell out of his fish? Anyway, so one day came, and it was about almost 5 o'clock, 5 minutes before 5, and everybody was kind of looking down the street, and for the first time, Harry's uncle had one fish left before closing. And they're like, finally, justice, karma, because karma is such a big thing with fish, I guess. But, Harry's uncle wasn't going to sell all of his fish, and Harry's uncle finally said, okay, to himself, it was going to happen eventually. Anyway, 4:59 comes by, and it's one of those traditional bells goes off, and this woman comes in. See, Harry's uncle, yes, he was a retailer in terms of selling fish, but he was a brilliant marketer and a brilliant storyteller. He never, ever wanted anybody that ever entered his store to feel like they were the last customer of the day or his only customer of the day. So when she came in, she says, hi, I'd like your finest herring. But he knew he only had one. But he said, no problem. And he made a big production of it. Put his hand in the water, scooped around as if there were so many fish that he had to find, picks it up, puts it on the scale, says 4 pounds, what a beauty. She says, yeah, that's nice. Do you have anything bigger? Harry's uncle knew what he was doing. He's done this before. This isn't his first rodeo. He says, sure, no problem. Takes the fish, throws it back in the water, spins his hand around and around and around, picks it up, and with his thumb on the scale, puts it on the scale, says 6 pounds, what a beauty. She says, great, I'll take both. But see, Harry's uncle, he was that true marketer. Never wants that customer to feel like he's the only customer of the day or the last customer of the day. And so his response was, sorry, only one per customer. What I love about that story is there's nothing socially responsible. There is nothing that I can even connect to what the dancing that was going on stage just now. There is no linear connection. But the connection there is that every interaction we have every day is about making people feel like they're important, like we're important, and that they're just not our last customer or our only person that we meet for that day. So now I want to tell you a little bit about my story. If you're looking at a map of the world, so on your side, this is going to be kind of the former Soviet Union, Australia, North America, Latin America. My dad was born in Uzbekistan, but was originally from Ukraine, and that's where he eventually settled. My mom was born literally in the middle of Siberia, northern Russia, and grew up in Latvia. By religion, by definition, I'm Jewish, and so it was a very typical Jewish capitalistic path when Stalin was around to kind of get out of Dodge, if you will. And so over time, as things started to get a little bit better, through a long story, my parents ended up meeting. They got married in Latvia. My brother was born. 1973, they left for Israel. Now, my parents were extremely poor, and their family was poor. You know, they'd be in a place from here to there, not much bigger, maybe had 15 people. And so when they moved to Israel, things started to get a little bit better. But they were kind of in a stage where my parents always said, what else could we find? What else could we do and provide? How else could we provide a better life for our kids? So I was born in Israel, in a place called Ramat Gan, just outside of Tel Aviv. And 2 months after I was born, my family moved to Canada. The funny thing is, my dad is a cartographer by trade. For those of you that don't know what that is, it means he makes maps. And so originally we were supposed to move to South Africa, and in my dad's infinite wisdom, he said, wait a minute, I make maps. Why are we moving to South Africa, which is this big? Let's move to Canada, which is this big. Show of hands, just clapping. How many people here are, when I say immigrant, I mean immigrant from a non-Western country? Can you just kind of clap your hands? It is a daily struggle for any immigrant in a Western culture. We have brilliant doctors from Pakistan that are working behind convenience store counters. We have, brilliant lawyers that are working as taxi drivers, not minimizing any of those professions. But in Western culture, we have treated immigrants subparly or subpoorly. I don't even know what, we treat them bad. And my parents were an example of this. Both mechanical engineers, both brilliant education, barely spoke the language of English. When they came to Canada, they were treated like crap. My mom was a breadwinner for a while. My dad struggled. Like a lot of immigrants, he worked in one pawn shop and then another pawn shop. But somehow over the years, they saved up a little bit of cash. And over the years, they opened up their own furniture store. And that furniture store started to do pretty well. They had 3, then 4, then 5. They sold one, they started another. In over 15 years or 17 years, I saw firsthand what 2 immigrant people who had no choice at all but to survive, how they were able to create employment for dozens and dozens of people. And I would think about the dozens and dozens more of those people that had food on the table because of these 2 immigrant people that were my parents. And so I kind of kept that memory in the back of my head as I continued through my journey. When I was 17, I just started my undergrad at a school called Western Ontario, University of Western Ontario in Canada. And like a lot of my friends who were all going to Europe, and I did grow up relatively in a well-off area, but we ourselves weren't necessarily, jumping bridges. So all my friends were going to Europe. I didn't have that kind of money. So this is 1997, so really before the internet became the internet. And so I found some creepy guy on the internet, and I said, hey, can I come down to Belize and work with you? He's like, sure, come on. I'll let you stay with me for a month. And it ended up being more. And what that was for me was the first time I really experienced, now Belize has evolved since, but it was the first time I really experienced what a true developing country was. I literally lived in the jungle, swimming with piranhas and tigers, building tree nurseries. I burnt down a whole forest. I'll get into that later on. And it was a great experience, but I was 17. And I said, okay, I don't know what this experience means for me in my life, because as I was starting to talk to my friends, they all were excited to go to university. They knew they wanted to be doctors or lawyers or tree huggers, whatever their profession was going to be. But I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I wasn't in a rush to figure it out. I was only 17. And so from there, I ended up continuing forward, and I went to Western. I ended up studying in Singapore for a little bit. My undergrad was in communication. I traveled around Southeast Asia. And I got brought to Cambodia. And in Cambodia, I had a really interesting experience. I was in Phnom Penh, which is the capital there, and it's just intersection of crazy amounts of bicycles and traffic and fumes and exhaust. And it was the middle of the night, about 11 o'clock, and I was traveling with a friend of mine from Sweden who was a former military officer. Military, strong, courage, knows how to handle crazy situations. And suddenly, all we saw in the middle of this intersection was a massive crash. And I couldn't remember how many of these bicycles all basically smashed in the middle, and there's this one white 300-pound foreigner in the middle of it all, screaming, his leg is broken at the top of his lungs as if he's gonna die, and not one of these one of these locals are helping him. They literally let him be in pain in the middle, and they circle him. I rush right to the middle, watching my Swedish military friend shocked, not knowing what to do, standing in his drawers. And I go right into the middle, and I help this guy out. I'm a $180, so I help this 300-pound guy. Nobody's willing to help. I'm yelling at all the locals, please, somebody help me pick up. Not a single person is willing to help me. Turns out, long story short, I helped this guy off. He was okay. I mean, his leg was pretty battered, but he was okay, and he needed money. Somebody had stolen his wallet. The motorcyclist that was on him on purpose created the accident so that he could be in the middle, and then they robbed him blind. So he tells me this story, and my heart goes out to him. I'm a traveler. I'm a poor little traveler. I give him a couple $100, not even a couple hundred, but I give him enough money so he could manage. And he's like, oh, thank you so much, thank you so much. And so the next night, I go and see, I was just walking by somewhere randomly, and suddenly I see he's just totally fine drinking beers with his buddies. And this guy scammed me. And so when I went to the owner near the cafe, near this place, and I said, hey, why did nobody tell me this is going to happen? And he says, when do you white people ever listen to us? If I was to tell you this guy's scamming you, would you believe him or would you believe me? And unfortunately, it's a big part of our reality in our society. And so I had that memory kind of stuck in my head. And it was right. It was a very naive way to think, but it's how a lot of people still do and did think. So when you fast forward, after this, I finished my undergrad. I decided to go to Latin America. Took a year off before I did my MBA. And in Latin America, two things happened to me. Number one, I was in Rio de Janeiro, and I'm in the middle of a bus. And it's a crowded bus, and the way it works is there's a driver, and there's a ticket holder, and someone you pay your money. And this guy gets on the bus, didn't think anything of it, took off his shirt, put it in the top corner, and I was traveling with a friend of mine, and he pulls out a gun and starts taking everybody's money. Now, for those of you that are immigrants or have immigrant parents, you know you busted your butts off to get that passport. Nobody is taking that away from you. And so this guy's taking everybody's money, and like an idiot, I refuse to give him anything. And he pulls this gun basically into my mouth and into my chest, and he's saying in Portuguese, which I don't speak, but I speak enough Spanish, he's saying, give me your money, you stupid little guy, like I'm gonna kill you right here in front of everyone. And till this day, I hope I'm right, but I swear it was a toy gun. I'm married now with 2 kids, I don't play that same gamble. But I called his bluff, and I won. But I saw firsthand how poverty affected this guy so much that he had to feel like he had to take people's lives. But at the same time, what was happening is right when I got to Argentina, I get into Argentina, and the economic crisis hits. And I watch some of the most successful people in the world close out of their banks, and with a symbolic symbol, they are banging on the doors of the bank. With one hand, they have a fork. With the other hand, they have a knife saying, give me back the money that is mine. Just so you understand what happened in Argentina, the dollar, US dollar, and the Argentinian peso were 1-to-1. So to buy a pair of shoes was $100. The economy was falling so fast, the country couldn't figure out how to stabilize anything. So I literally was able to buy shoes for $3. That are normally $100. The economy was falling apart. And so when I watched all these people in the streets begging for their own money, I realized I had something very powerful in my pocket. I had US dollars. And so what I ended up doing is I walked right into the middle of Buenos Aires, and I created a small little black market. And I started trading currencies. I gave reasonable rates, enough to protect my security. I knew nothing about economics or what I was doing, but these people needed something, and I had it, and I figured out a way to give it to them. Fast forward, I'm doing my MBA. And in my MBA, I'm not your typical MBA. WorldCom's happening, Enron's happening. All these things are falling apart. Again, not your typical MBA. And so what I end up seeing is a world of my colleagues stressing over corporate jobs and management jobs, which I'm very proud of all of them in their roles, but they weren't for me. And I said, how do I leverage what my parents did as small business owners, creating jobs, developing countries, commerce? How do I blend it all together? And so I created a charity with a friend of mine called MBAs Without Borders. And we did, as was said earlier, we built small businesses across Africa, Asia, Latin America, 25 countries from Afghanistan and all those that were mentioned earlier, working in renewable energy, handicrafts, microfinance, and a couple of other areas. And while the work we were doing was really good, I was always challenged. Is what we're doing good enough? What I mean by that is, sure, we were helping great businesses and social entrepreneurs in developing countries, but the people that got the real experiences were the MBAs that we sent, the graduates. And there's nothing wrong with that, but what real impact were we having at true development? And so I started doing some homework, and it's kind of interesting. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa in specific, since 1960, the world has spent over $1 trillion in traditional aid in Africa. And I won't get too technical on the economic side, but more countries are worse off in Africa today than they were in 1960 from a pure economic basis. So what happened to that $1 trillion? It went the wrong way. And so I had this in the back of my head, and I had, were we doing enough with MBAs Without Borders? I loved commerce, and then a moment happened to me when I was in Liberia. For those of you that do or do not know, Liberia is in West Africa. Charles Taylor, former dictator, pretty much cut everybody's hands and legs off. It's a pretty brutal environment. But they have amazing natural resource there of natural rubber and some other materials. And similar to when Harry Rosen was telling his story to me about his uncle that had all those stalls with the exact same thing, I was in Liberia and watching this shoe salesman standing there right before me and another 20 guys right beside him selling the exact same thing. But I love business, I always have, and I've always been trying to figure out how to blend it all together with where my heart is at. And so I just asked him, I said, how's business? And it was probably that moment that set the trajectory of Oliberté, which is the shoe company we run now. And he says to me, how's business? How do you expect it to be? All the white charities are coming next week with their free shoes. How do I compete with free? And it was that moment when he said, how do I compete with free? It was when I realized giving does not do good. It feels good, but it doesn't do good. I'm not talking giving in terms of education or children or healthcare. Those are Maslow's hierarchies of needs, and those must be met in any way, shape, or form, and I believe those should be free and supported. But to develop a nation, to develop a country, a city, doesn't matter whether it's Ethiopia or whether it's New Orleans or whether it's Boston, Massachusetts. It works in commerce. Commerce done in a way that makes sense and don't worry, nobody noticed. Makes sense and moves us forward. And so I said, okay, in a unique transaction, I was able to sell MBAs Without Borders. There's no owners in a charity, but I personally own the trademarks. I sold it to a charity that was originally started by Condoleezza Rice and her group called MBA Enterprise Corps. And I said, what can we do? And so what I did is I took the $35,000 I got from MBAs Without Borders. I bought a ton of machinery out of Portugal because I wanted to make rubber soles, basically, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. The name Oliberté is a play on Liberia, liberty, because originally the idea actually was to build a shoe factory in Liberia. I had a great business partner in Liberia. We brought in all the machines, and unfortunately, he passed away of malaria pretty quickly on into our production. I didn't know what to do, and I was trying to figure it out, and then from there, I said, where are we going to make our shoes? And I'd heard about Ethiopia, and they had all this potential and all these resources, and that's where we moved. And so what we did, and I don't talk too much about Oliberté, and I'm always happy to answer any questions later on, what we did is we created the first premium footwear brand, all made in sub-Saharan Africa. But one thing is to make shoes in Africa, one thing is to do it properly. And so what we did is we set out to be not a responsible footwear brand, but to be the most responsible footwear brand made in sub-Saharan Africa that others can be a model for. We will never employ 1 million people, but we hope to be the reason that 1 million people employed in sub-Saharan Africa and maybe even the United States leveraging a similar model. Because for me, what it all comes down to is we make the best shoes in the world and we make it in one of the most difficult places in the world. And it's the opportunity where I get to create my masterpiece. It's where my parents had a business. It's where I was in Cambodia. It's where I was in Brazil and Argentina. I was doing my MBA. I ran MBAs Without Borders. And I wasn't sure where all these things were leading, but I did not care. I knew it would take me to where I need to go. And today, that's Oliberté. Oliberté allows us to employ the most amazing people. We are the first fair trade certified shoe company in the world, not just in Africa, but in the world, because it's a way for us to say something very different. The shoe industry doesn't like me very much because we have basically said the one place where you cut costs, we are paying more and paying fairly. That is why. That is why we continue to be tried to be acquired by other companies. That's why we have fantastic investors to date. But at the end of the day, it's because it's allowed us to live under one very simple premise, and that's been the journey that I've always passed on. And I leave this with you as a closing saying. And I don't know if I coined it or coined it as a result of all these journeys, but I hope it sticks with you, and I hope you use it in whatever shape or form that makes sense to you as you continue on, whether you're 18 or 45 or 99. That today is only the same day as yesterday if we do absolutely nothing about tomorrow. Thank you very much.